snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hi guys, so I am here today to do a book review. Actually, I'm going to be reviewing 3 books in one book review. These 3 books are going to be the first 3 in the Lunar Chronicles series, which is by Marissa Meyer. I read these 3 books because the third one, Cress, is actually nominated as part of the booktubesff awards in the YA category, and so obviously I needed to read the first 2 so that I would understand Cress, and I did that, and I read all 3 of them this month, so I wanted to do a joint review of all 3. Let's start with Cinder. Cinder is the first one in the series, and if you guys don't know, then this series basically is a series that is set in a sci-fi futuristic kind of world, but it focuses on retellings of fairy tales. So the first one is called Cinder, and it is a retelling of Cinderella with sci-fi futuristic stuff added in. The second one is called Scarlet, and that one is focused on the story of Little Red Riding Hood, and it is fairly similar to the story of Red Riding Hood, but with the sci-fi stuff thrown in. And then the third one is called Cress, and this one focuses on Cress, who is basically Rapunzel, and it's kind of a retelling of Rapunzel, but it definitely sort of detours away from the original a lot more than the first 2, so it's a little bit less predictable. With all that said, the first one in the series is Cinder, and I definitely felt like this was a fun series. The series focuses on Cinder initially. She is our main character, and we see her as she is a mechanic working in the junkyards in Beijing, and she has a market stall where she fixes up stuff for people. She is actually part cyborg, which is pretty interesting because cyborgs in this society are fairly lowly regarded. People don't really seem to like them, and there is a fairly high prejudice against cyborgs. In this world, there is a thing called the draft, which basically means that cyborgs can volunteer to go and get tested and experimented on in order to cure luminotosis, which is a plague that has been sweeping Earth, and it's pretty deadly. If you get the plague, you're going to die. So that is a major ongoing problem with all of the Earth world throughout these books, and we don't really know what the plague is or where it comes from. People have been experimenting for many, many years to try and find a cure, and they haven't been able to. So it's a pretty deadly thing, and you don't want to get it. But Cinder works in the market, and she fixes up stuff for various different people, and one day she is working there when the plague breaks out, so she runs home to get away from it. She lives with her mother, who is a stepmother to her, and her 2 daughters, which are her stepsisters. She gets on really well with one of her stepsisters, the other one not so much, and she has a friend called Itko, who is a sort of android. Basically, she has a fairly decent lifestyle, but she's quite poor. She gives all the money she earns to her mother, and they don't get along, so it is very stereotypical Cinderella, but with all this sci-fi stuff thrown in. We get to see later on that the prince, of course, does come into it, and we do see more of the Cinderella themes, but I think it's different enough that it was interesting and exciting, even though it still follows a fairly similar standard storyline. It does it in a way that brings in these new elements, such as the lunar people, which are people who live on the moon, and the fact that there is a potential threat of war between Earth and the moon at all times. And we also have cyborgs, and we have this scientific technology that means you can have news feeds in your eyeballs, and you can have mechanical hands and mechanical limbs, and you have people who are genetically modified, and all sorts of crazy things get thrown into this series. So I think Cinder was definitely a fast-paced, fun read. I did like it a lot as a story. It was fun, it was enjoyable, it was adventurous. I liked seeing all of the new elements that Marissa Meyer wanted to throw in. I didn't think it was overly well developed in terms of the world or the characters. I thought there were a lot of cool ideas, which did get developed as it went further on into the next 2 books, but particularly Cinder didn't feel like a convincing character to me. There were moments where I felt like she perhaps should have acted differently for the circumstance, and she didn't, or maybe had more of a violent or sad or happy reaction, and she didn't have that. So I didn't think she was thoroughly convincing as a character, but I did think that the story was fun, and so I ended up giving the first one in the series, Cinder, a 3 out of 5 stars. I then went on to the second one in the series, which is called Scarlet. The second one focuses on a character who is of course called Scarlet, and Scarlet is kind of the Red Riding Hood of this world. She lives in Europe, so on the other side of the world to Cinder, and she lives with her grandmother who works on a farm, and they have lived together for a long time. Her father left when she was fairly young, so she's been living with her grandmother for quite a long time, and she and her grandmother have a great relationship and she loves her, but her grandmother has been missing for quite a while when we meet the storyline, and so she eventually decides that she needs to do something about this. She needs to find out what's happening with her grandmother, and she finds the sort of end of a trail to do with her grandmother and the disappearance, and she follows it, and of course along the way she meets a man called Wolf. And that's pretty much all I'm going to say about that storyline, but I will say Scarlet wasn't my favourite character. I didn't really care about her at all. Wolf was a more interesting character. I definitely thought he was mysterious and we had some cool stuff going on with his storyline, but Scarlet just didn't really interest me that much. She was a little bit boring, and she was very fixated on finding her grandmother, as you would be in a situation like this, but she didn't have much else going for her personality-wise. She really didn't have a fleshed out personality other than I want to find my grandma. I didn't really care about her, which meant I could only really give the storyline itself a 2 out of 5 stars, plus it focuses a lot on Cinder's story as well as Scarlet's, and the two storylines do of course coalesce in the end, but honestly I thought it was going to be more focused on Scarlet, and because her name is the title of the book you would think she'd be a little bit more developed, but she isn't. So I only gave that one a 2 out of 5 stars. I just thought that was okay, and I actually preferred Cinder's storyline in that one to Scarlet's. And then the third book is where we meet Cress, and Cress is, as I said, she's kind of a Rapunzel-esque character. She is a lunar, which means she comes from the moon, and she has been trapped in a satellite for 7 years of her life, completely isolated and cut off from everyone else in the universe. No one really knows she's there except for her mistress, who is very, very cruel and keeps her away from everyone. Again, fairly stereotypical Rapunzel, but she lives in a satellite and she basically is in charge of hacking and interfering with Earth's communications in order to give Luna the sort of advantage over Earth and mean that Luna can sneak ships into Earth's atmosphere without Earth knowing because she's scrambling the signals, and she's also very good at tracking ships and hacking into systems and things like that. So she lives in this satellite on her own. As we see her, she's very upset with her life. She doesn't enjoy it. She doesn't want to be working for the lunar people. She knows that they are nasty and evil, and because she spends so much time on her own in this satellite, she has a real desire to go to Earth and sort of see what it's like and interact with those people, because those are the ones she's constantly monitoring, and so she feels more of a connection to them than the Lunars who sort of chucked her out when she was a really young baby. In the final book we see all three of the storylines come together. We see Scarlet, Cress and Cinder all together at various points, and we also see Cress develop a lot more than we did Scarlet. I thought that Scarlet really didn't develop any more at all in Cress. I didn't really care about her at all, but she wasn't in most of the book because she gets herself into a fairly tricky situation quite early on. Cinder developed a lot more, and we see Cress and she gets more of a personality than Scarlet did. I think on the whole the third book was my favourite one. The third book definitely had more going for it in terms of action. Escapades and adventure were always happening. There was definitely always something going on. The team, as I like to call them, were sort of always planning things and planning what they needed to do next and how they were going to manoeuvre and how they were going to interfere with the political situation that is threatening Earth, between Luna and Earth. And I really enjoyed the last one. I thought it was a lot more impressive in terms of how the different fairy tales linked together and the way that each of the characters developed and the way that they became more interesting. I think it's a series that has grown on me a lot more. I think the first 2 books were decent but not great, and the third one was definitely an improvement on them both. I don't think it's quite at 4-star level yet. I think it needs a bit more development for me to really call it a 4-star, and because each book seems to add more characters instead of developing characters, I don't know if we'll get that. But I did like the action and intensity of it, and I thought it was a very fun romp around with a lot of cool characters coming into it. I gave the third one a 3.5 out of 5 stars, which means it's kind of an average of around 3 stars, which means I just like the series. If you guys have read this series or you want to read this series, I would love to hear your thoughts. If you agree with me, disagree with me, tell me why in the comments. And thank you all for watching, and I will see you all very soon in another video. Bye! Me and you gonna have a little chat about the